Folks, welcome back in to another episode of the Mark and Austin Show on the Mark Lesko podcast. As promised, we are joined by Gregg Garrity today, talking some blue-white game festivities. It is Friday. We are a mere one day away. Potential of the weather to betray us a little bit. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out tomorrow. But Mark is here as well. I just want to welcome Gregg in. Gregg, welcome in. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. Always a pleasure.
So I think probably first things first, kind of setting the groundwork here with blue white so close. We'll get Gregg's thoughts first, and then we'll defer to Mark, and maybe I'll throw in a couple of things that I'm keeping an eye out for too. But what are some things that you're interested in seeing during the blue white game? Obviously, we've had a bunch of turnover on the roster, a bunch of new guys either going to be going into starting roles or competing for new starting positions. Anything in particular that you're interested in looking at, Gregg?
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of bullet points I could hit here, but I think the one big obvious one would be Drew Aller. I mean, seeing him as QB1, how he commands the offense and just kind of his poise and the step he's taken, but really the whole offense in general. Like I'm a receiver guy. I'm interested to see how these younger receivers or transfer receivers are going to perform and how they go against some of the best DBs in the nation. I'm not sure. Did they release? I assume it's 1v1-on-ones, offense and defense, or did they? Because I know back a couple of years ago, whenever I was playing, there was kind of like a mix. But I assume it's more of a 1v1. So I'm curious to see how those receivers are going to do against um, our veteran secondary groups. And then
The
just
game, right?
continue to go down the list. What's that?
I think it's a game type atmosphere, so I think it will be 1 versus 1. I hope so.
Yeah, me too. But thinking about the running backs, seeing how they make another step, I'm excited for them this season. And then obviously the offensive line, which has seemingly gotten improved throughout the years, and I think this is kind of the year where they can really etch their mark in becoming like one of the more dominant fronts in the whole country. So really just looking at the offensive side, defense, I know will be solid, but with Aller and the receivers and some of these younger guys stepping up, I think on the offensive side that'll be exciting to see that first kind of glimpse at where they're at.
Yeah, I agree.
100%.
I think those are some really good points. Mark, anything to add? Maybe a little bit of follow up on some of the stuff Gregg said, and then also layering in maybe some different things that maybe you're looking out for as well.
Yeah, I agree with Gregg. Drew Aller is definitely a guy that I'm going to be watching because this is the first time we'll really see him play. And based off what you said last week, it sounds like they're going to do a actual like scrimmage type game situation. So I would love to see 1s versus 1s. I hope Singleton and Katron play. Austin, you don't think they're going to play, right?
I think you're going to see largely the Tank Smith show. I just don't see any utility as far as really. Maybe they get a couple of touches like on the first series or something, and then call it a day and get into some shorts and enjoy the day or as well as you can if it does end up raining a little bit. But yeah, I just don't. The risk versus reward ratio on what you can see or figure out. It just doesn't make sense to me as to why they would play a bunch of reps.
Cephas
I
isn't playing,
challenge you
right?
there though. What's that?
What's that? I said Cephas
I
isn't playing, right? Because he's not here yet.
No.
Yeah,
So Malik
yeah,
McLean, he'll be the
yeah.
guy that
Go ahead, Gregg.
transfer wise. Yeah, go ahead, Gregg.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I'm sure they'll get a lot of, I don't know about a lot of, but I think they'll get a decent amount of touches and run. Just thinking about Franklin, how he kind of approaches the blue and white game, historically speaking, and thinking about my time there weren't really any guys that were, I mean, Saquon from what I can remember, he still got a solid amount of touches in blue and white games. Christian Hackenberg, he was in there for a good amount of time, and these bigger time recruits and players, veterans even, um, they were getting 2, 3, 4 series. So I'm curious to see how he'll manage the running backs. Yeah, I think weather has an impact on it, but I think we'll get at least a couple series of the running backs. At least I'm hoping. Maybe I'm completely wrong.
Yeah,
Well,
that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
another thing too, to your point, Greg, I wouldn't be totally opposed to it as long. I mean, obviously they're going to have safeguards in place and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff too, but um, I wouldn't mind seeing them get some reps with Aller catching the ball out of the backfield. I think they can be a little bit more dynamic there this year, and I think Katron was actually pretty good last season of catching the ball securely.
yeah,
Nick had a little bit of cleaning up to do, but from the tidbits that we've kind of learned through spring here, it seems like he's cleaned up that aspect of the game. And Singleton in particular, I mean, the dude just looks impressive. I think he was listed at 6 foot or 6'1", 228. I
yeah,
mean, he's definitely beefed up quite a bit, and hasn't lost a touch of speed. That sounds like all kinds of trouble if you can break into the second level.
yeah. And that was something that I kind of expected. Um, you look at, I mean, I know that the strength program in terms of like the titles have changed, but I'm fairly positive that what they're actually doing, the programs and the lifts and the conditioning and sprints that they're doing, I'm fairly certain that it's pretty parallel to what Galt was doing back in the day. And you look at the numbers that um, each and every single year, guys would improve from, coming in as high school players, from freshman to sophomore to junior. Everybody would always make a big jump, especially going from that sophomore to, or excuse me, freshman to sophomore leave, kind of having a full year under your belt. So, kind of expected, man. And to your point, like it's exciting. Like, hey, he got a lot bigger, stronger, and he didn't lose a touch of speed. And I'm sure that's the same for a lot of guys. So that definitely exciting to again see those younger guys take that next step.
Yeah, I
Yeah, no
do
doubt
think
about it. No doubt
yeah, I
about it.
do think like Greg said, I think we will see some Singleton and some Katron. I mean, you know, the way I see the spring game is they do scrimmages. I'm assuming Greg would know better, but they do scrimmages and like almost game like
Mhm.
situations in practice. So that's pretty much what they're doing with the spring game. It's pretty much just a practice. There's just people watching. So,
Yeah,
to not play these guys during the spring game just because it's a spring game, I don't think they wouldn't I don't think they would really hold back too much on a lot of these guys because it's essentially just another practice. So, let's say God forbid, someone got hurt in the spring game. Well, they could get hurt in practice too. So,
yeah,
I think we'll see everyone. And like Greg was saying, I'm looking at Drew Aller, and then as I said last week, or I guess this week, the line of scrimmage. How does the O line look against the D line? How does the D line look against the O line? And if it's one versus ones, how do our receivers play against this secondary? Because our secondary is pretty good. So, how do these receivers like Malik McClain, Keandre, guys like that, Caden Saunders, hopefully see him. How do they play with Aller against this great defense? Because they kind of have an advantage that they're going up against Penn State defense because they have so many. That defense is just stacked. So, um, yeah, that's really what I'm looking for. But mainly just Drew Aller. How does he look? I'm really excited to see how he looks. Greg, is there anybody on defense that you're looking for particularly?
um, I mean, Carter's another guy that he's just a physical specimen that I think, I mean, he's already getting a lot of hype about All-American status and one of the top players in the nation defensively, kind of like a Micah Parsons type. Um, same thing with Chop Robinson. I think it's exciting that we got him for another year, and you know, able to take on more of a leadership role in the defense. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Mark. I think it'll be exciting, kind of another reload year for that defensive front, or even if you want to like, you know, include the front seven. Um, I mean, that's where Penn State seems to historically thrive. And
Mhm.
it finally, you know, finally seems like, you know, with Terry Smith, we kind of figured out recruiting DBs and getting them developed and
Mhm.
playing kind of the right way on the Saturdays. So I'm excited to see the defense as a whole, but I think that defensive front could be a problem for a lot of teams. You know, again, just guys take another step through the off season. Younger guys coming in having a bigger role on Saturdays and on the team. So I'm looking forward to see those guys. Those guys, like I said, are going to cause problems on a lot of Saturdays.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
as we said at the beginning, we're joined by Gregg Garrity today here on the Mark Lesko podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't yet. If this is your first time tuning in, we're just covering Penn State football and the spring game tomorrow. So, Gregg, when you guys were doing the spring game when you were in school, when you were a player at Penn State, like were you guys as a team, like were you guys like excited to get into a game, to have a crowd? Like were you guys like amped up about that, or was it kind of just like this is another practice type thing? We just gonna have people there. You know, what was it like as a team going into a spring game?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, you know, I think it's always exciting getting the opportunity to play in Beaver Stadium. You know, I know throughout spring ball we have our scrimmages there, and there's no fans there like on I don't know if they still do it. Usually throughout spring ball, it's usually like maybe Saturday or Sunday night where you'll do a scrimmage. You know, obviously no fans there, and that's even exciting. Like, hey,
Mhm.
we're going to the stadium, and then when you know incorporate fans with the blue and white game, and it is a game day atmosphere. Like, hey, we get bussed over. There's still a bunch of fans meeting us, getting off the bus. Like, we go into the locker room. Where you know it feels like a game. So guys get amped for it for sure. And for a lot of guys, you know, of course you have your more established, you know, guys who, hey, we know you're going to be a starter. You know, whether it's offense, defense, or what have you. But for most guys on the team, for you know, 75% of the team, this is their opportunity to make that step, you know, fight for that spot in the depth chart of a one or two, or just start to climb it for your younger guy. So, you know, being able to have another opportunity at that, plus to do it in front of fans,
Yeah.
guys get jacked up for it for sure. Like they're putting the eye black on, they're tying their cleats extra tight, they're putting the armbands on, like it feels like a game. Um, so even though it's just an exhibition, another practice,
Yeah.
it definitely feels, at least from what I can remember, it feels like, hey, like it's time to go.
Good. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that that's the way it's approached by the players. I mean, I feel like if if we had spring games in high school, it'd probably be the same exact thing. Absolutely. I know they have spring games in Texas, high school
Yeah.
football. They don't really have them here, but um, yeah, I know they have them in Texas. But yeah, just thought I would ask about that because I know the fans are always excited. Again, I hope they go back to like the actual game type play because like you said, Gregg, I would love to see them be one on one. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
You were in school when Keegan Michael Key was there, right? When he did the
Yeah,
Franklin
yeah.
impression.
I forget what year I was. I might have even been a senior at that point. Um,
I think it was like
but yeah,
fall or spring of six. Let me think. It was spring of 16, I think. Maybe.
Yeah, that sounds right. So that was my senior year. Yeah, I thought that was the case because I remembered um Lash was still being renovated. Like I
Okay.
remember that whole year, like whole preseason. Um, like we couldn't use the locker room at all. So the locker room was off limits for like 6 months. So during like all of our workouts, conditioning and spring ball, we literally had to change. Like the receivers changed in the like the receiver meeting room and like the DB's DB room, and so on and so forth. So it was like it was the weirdest kind of time because we literally didn't have lockers. It was just kind of like a little room. Um,
Yeah.
but I don't know how I remember like how that lines up with when Keegan Michael Key came in. But I remember for some reason like we definitely weren't in the locker room at that point. Um, but yeah, man, he was hilarious. We weren't expecting that at all. Um, so I thought that was I could have actually sworn was that spring ball or was that I thought it was homecoming and he when he was homecoming king. I could be wrong.
I'm pretty
Well,
sure spring
so
game.
so so there were two instances, like you say. One was homecoming. He was back for a homecoming, and there was also one. It was right around the blue white game because he came out of the blue white game and did like a pregame interview and the whole antic. So there were two different
Yeah.
occasions.
Okay. Yeah, that was hilarious though. Like we weren't expecting that at all. And like he walks in, with the whole Franklin get up and everybody just kind of did a double take. Like there was a like a delayed response because he looks, with the glasses, with the get up, like everything like to a T, like the way he walked in, everything. But like everybody did a double take. There was like a couple of seconds where it was like, oh, that's just Coach Franklin. Wait a second. And then there was just like this uproar of laughter, excitement, and then he just killed it. Like he went through like he didn't even introduce himself. Like he kept on the Franklin face and like he just went through a team meeting as if he was Franklin and it was so funny. And he got it to a T. Like we were talking to him and I'm not sure if it was in the video, um, but he was like studying like how he went through meetings, like just different phrases he would say, like, buzzwords and um it was just so funny, man. We were not expecting it, but that was yeah, that was a cool little treat.
I didn't know that he just like kept talking like that.
Oh
I
yeah.
thought he just came in and then everyone was like, "Oh, it's him," and then that's hilarious. So, did Franklin ever come in when he was doing that? Do you remember?
I think he probably like snuck through the door, like in the back, like after we kind of realized it was him, because I'm sure he wanted to see it. Because right afterwards, like yeah, he came down. They were standing next to each other, everything like that. But um, yeah, like he literally went through like so for our team meetings, the first thing like he'd come in, and he'd put up a quote on the board and pick somebody on the team to read it out. And if you would like stutter, like kind of mess up a little bit, like he'd be like, read it again. And of course, I don't know who he picked. I think it might have been our Australian punter back in the day, Dan.
Pascarillo.
Yeah, Pascarillo, and I think he was just like laughing through the quote. So he was just like, do it again, do it again, do it again. Um, and then like he would go through like the script, like he did everything to a T. Like and he didn't break character at all. Um,
Wow.
it was funny, man. It was pretty funny. Like I said, like he literally studied. I think they were taping our team meetings maybe for like a week or a couple weeks, and he literally studied his mannerisms to get him down. So that was pretty cool.
Definitely a
Yeah,
pro's pro.
that's funny. I like I said, I didn't know that he did that whole thing. That's hilarious. But yeah, he was there with Spice Adams too. I think it was the spring game, and Spice was like
Mhm.
interviewing him, and he was he was running across the field. I think he was like intimidating Franklin that way too, but imitating, I should say. Yeah, that was funny. But yeah, man, it looks like unfortunately the weather's not going to be good to kind of get back into that. I don't know if just the way I'm looking at it right now, I don't even know if they're gonna have it, but we'll see just because there's lightning.
Mm.
But Greg, do you know what they would do if they canceled the spring game? Would they just not play it like ever? Like they wouldn't play it at all?
So I think, from what I can remember, because with State College, Central PA weather around this time of year, you just never know. So I think there was always like, hey, if there's bad weather, we can't do it. And they would always like push to make it happen, like whether it's a little delay or um, whatever it might be. But I think like worst case scenario, um, they would they would do it in Haluba. Hey, I'm getting that call.
Yeah.
Could we
Yeah.
just
Yep.
take a pause?
Yeah.
Okay.
No
Yeah.
problem.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, Austin. Because it's a carnival basically. They have all the rides there now. I'm sure you saw them. And they had the Hub Carnival, I guess, the other day too. But the Hub Lawn Carnival. But yeah, man. I'm trying to think if I I'm trying to think if there was a time when I was in school, we were in school that they actually canceled it. But
I don't remember.
yeah.
I don't remember a full cancellation. I remember a delay one time, where we were having some funky weather, and it was delayed for a little bit, but they did ultimately finish, the full time allotment, I think.
Mhm.
But yeah, never a complete cancellation. Unfortunately, the chance of thunder showers again. It's a chance from what I saw for most of the day, 50%. So are we going to be in the 50% that gets whacked, 50% that doesn't? What is the lightning situation? That really won't even matter. If we're getting rained on or not, if there's lightning, obviously you can't play.
Yeah.
So a lot of things going on, but such is life when dealing with the weather. We'll just have to wait and see and figure it out. Hope for the best.
Yeah. So as we said before, we're back on the timer type deal. So if we have to here, we'll just take a little break and then come back with the second half here. But we're going to talk to Greg about recruiting. Jay Paterno tweet a little bit about the Steelers and the draft since he's a Steelers fan, and then the latest NIL deal, and that'll be it. Should be pretty quick and sweet, but yeah, that the weather is definitely a factor tomorrow. We were going to have someone come and meet us. He's in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He actually wanted us to meet his dad too, who's a letterman from Penn State. But their airport is flooded, which I guess is pretty rare and it's like a freak thing that their airport is flooded. They got like I think like 2 foot of rain. So
Yeah,
I mean,
over 19 inches of rain.
for an airport in Florida to be flooded, like that, it's an airport. Airports are massive. So for it to be flooded, that's an insane amount of rain. That they must just like they have to be like flooded. Like I'm talking like massive flooding. That's
Yeah,
like destroying
yeah,
homes and stuff. That's not good.
yeah. It's not just the airport. In the airport's defense, the entire city of Fort Lauderdale is underwater,
Yeah,
pretty much at this point.
that's
So
crazy.
obviously, we wish our friend the best, and hope that he and his family are safe, and that they're not, you know, underwater like the airport and some of the
Hmm.
other parts of Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah,
Dealing with a lot of nasty rainfall down there right now.
yeah, yeah. I believe this is the time of year when the floods are happening. I think it was what Houston that had that huge flood a few years ago. That was devastating. Um, Johnstown had a flood. That's one of the most famous floods of all time. I think it's the Johnstown flood, Johnstown, PA. Yeah, that's and then it's like hurricane season and tornado season. The summers are pretty hectic when it comes to like the weather and so I hope our guy gets to come up at some point. I think he said he's coming up in the fall for a game or two. And Yeah, that would be cool to meet his dad. I believe his dad was on one of the decade committees for the petition for Joe Paterno. So that's good to see. But I think he was like this. I don't want to say the wrong decade. It was like the 80s or something like that. So they basically had the petitions for Joe and like restore his statue, restore his wins. Just all this stuff that shouldn't have happened to him, but it unfortunately did. So,
Yeah,
Greg,
sorry about that.
oh no, you're good, man. So we were just talking a little bit about someone from our a viewer from our podcast wanted to come meet us this weekend, but his airport was flooded
No
there in
way.
Florida, so he couldn't come. So,
Holy crap.
but yeah, man, we're gonna hop into a couple other topics, but since we're hitting the timer,
Yeah, I was gonna say, did you just want to kind of refresh things?
yeah, we'll just take a little break here and then we'll come right back. So,
If you wanted to like ask me the same question, I can't remember the last thing we were talking about was, but I can just run through that if it's more
well,
of like a clean break.
we were just talking about the weather for tomorrow and what they might do because we don't know if they'll just you said they'll play it in Haluba, but fan wise, there's a ton of people in State College already that I've seen. So, what exactly do you think they're? I mean, it's been beautiful here. Yesterday it was 80, it was nearly 90
Yeah,
yesterday and
same here. Yeah,
beautiful.
same here in
Today is
Pittsburgh.
beautiful, and then tomorrow, of course, it's going to storm. So it's like, gosh darn it, why can't we just have a nice day for the spring game? But yeah, so you think they'll just play it in Haluba and then that's it, or
Like I don't have the answer for you. I remember like, hey, be prepared to just have it in Haluba. Um,
Mhm,
because there's only a certain amount of practices that you
mhm.
can have like compliantly in spring ball. Um, and to re-coordinate like, hey, we're gonna do this next Saturday, like that would just be too much. Like they have their schedule. Like as much as they want to incorporate the fans and the experience and everything like that, like the main priority is the players and making sure that the schedule is kind of where it needs to be in order. Like I said, I don't have like a direct answer for you, but I would assume, hey, family can go in Haluba, watch it. Um, but fans might be out of luck, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
As with most things, we'll probably just have to wait and see as the weather is
Yep.
concerned. Unfortunately, we can't control it, but I'm sure they have contingencies in place to make sure they don't squander the practice time that they do have. Again, because they're only allotted so many in spring ball. But for the sake of time, we will take a short break, and we will be right back for part two.
All right, everyone, back from the break. Once again, we're joined by former Penn State receiver, 2016 Big Ten champ, Gregg Garrity Jr. So, Greg, speaking of what we were just talking about, doing interviews and stuff, I remember when you did that interview, I think it was for the game against Georgia. They were asking you about your dad's play there in the national championship, and I think you said that he could have gotten more separation, but nonetheless, it was a good catch.
Yeah, there were some technique fundamentals as a receiver that weren't perfect in the 80s. Like I'm sure it was a lot different, like in terms of like how you got off press, like once you how you run a go, like how you get past the like that sort of stuff. So like he made the play. So at the end of the day, like that's all that matters. But I had to throw in a few points of critique there. But
Well, Yeah, man, he played for the Steelers and the Eagles both, so you know, he was doing some things right for sure,
Yeah, right.
playing in the
Yeah.
NFL. So
And just to
with
chime in briefly on that one, I got to tip the cap to anybody that played receiver back then, 80s, 90s, because
Different times.
that was the no, like if you were a receiver and you were willing to go across the middle too, you got to tip the cap to it because that's back when they could take your head off.
Yeah.
yep,
Uh, you know, like obviously there's a bunch of rules in place now where you can't really lay the wood that hard anymore, especially with the helmet to helmet stuff
Yeah.
and everything else. But back then, if you're willing to do that, I tip my
Oh yeah.
cap to you.
I have some stories from my dad, like through like practices and games and like even like growing up as a kid and NFL stories. Like definitely a different game. Definitely a different game for sure.
yeah, and I remember Fred Biletnikoff. They had the whole Stickum thing. So I don't know, I don't know if they used it in college or not, but I know it was actually something they used
Yeah.
in the NFL. They actually used that. So I
Who
don't know if
I'm
I would doubt Joe Paterno would ever let guys do that. But then again, if it wasn't like against the rules, then maybe they did. I don't know. But
Yeah.
you know, your dad didn't wear gloves either. I don't think any receiver wore
Yeah.
gloves back
No.
then. So
No.
that's
So
another
so that
thing.
that actually yeah, that brings up a funny story at Penn State. So I guess Joe Paterno, he was like the biggest non-believer of gloves. And back in the day, like I mean, those receiver gloves probably didn't do anything. Like there's probably no stick to them. It was just I don't know. Not many guys did wear them, but my dad would say like if there was a receiver, tight end, running back, whatever, that was wearing gloves and they dropped a ball, Joe would have a fit and make him take it off, take the gloves off, and like the whole team would have to take gloves off if they had them on. So yeah, definitely a different time period from that aspect as well. Because you look at the gloves today, I mean they are like, and I've never really felt what Stickum feels like, but it can't be too far off of what these gloves are. I
Yeah,
mean, like you wouldn't see like these Odell Beckham Jr. catches or Justin Jefferson catches without gloves. Like
yeah,
they give you a lot of room for error for sure.
yeah,
Like I have small hands and I've made some pretty decent catches in my day. And I have like pretty small hands. Like if you think Kenny Pickett has small hands, mine are probably an inch smaller.
yeah.
So gloves nowadays absolutely make a difference. Back in the 80s, probably not much. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely technological advancements. I do want to just
Yeah.
interject briefly on a little bit of football history because we did bring up the whole Stickum thing. I believe his name was Lester Hayes. I think he was defensive back for the Raiders. And that guy, if you don't know who that is, look him up for those watching. This guy would put so much Stickum on, he would have it all over his body to the point where it was just like dripping off of him. And I believe he led the league in interceptions with I think he had 13 picks
Jeez.
in a season, and he would just be covered head to toe and stick them everywhere. Um, just a little bit of fun historical value there with the whole Stickum conversation. There were definitely
Yeah.
people that pushed it to the forefront and
Yeah.
for sure got it banned.
Well, I remember. So I started playing football when I was 6 years old, and so that would have been like 2001. So I remember back in 2001, like the gloves back then, like they were getting there, but they still weren't like crazy. So I remember growing up, like my dad was really adamant about me not wearing gloves either. Like he was like, "Oh, you don't need those. Like they don't help at all." So really, the only time I would wear gloves would be like if it were like really cold out, which don't even help. They actually probably make it worse, but that's neither here nor there. So I didn't wear gloves until um, probably about eighth or ninth grade. Um, which when I started wearing them, I was like, holy crap, I've been missing out. And ever since then, like growing up, um, I would be really, really particular about my gloves. I remember in high school, like I had my practice gloves. I had like a couple pair of practice gloves, and I had a couple pair of game gloves. So I probably spent like a couple $100 on gloves in high school. And like for my game gloves, I did not let anything or anybody touch like the palm part of my glove. Like on game day, like everybody's like giving each other high fives and dapping each other up. Like I would not do that. Like if somebody gave me a high five, I would literally give them a high five with the back of my hand because I did not want to lose any of that stick. And I did that through like college and everything. Um, so I was really, really particular about my gloves. Um, and I know a lot of guys are too, but I probably took it to the next level.
Yeah, I actually have. I think these are from the first time I played. Like I played some semi-pro here in State
Yeah, there you
College. I
go.
think these were my gloves for that. And then my high school gloves, I think, were just Nikes. And then I got these for like my I played in an alumni game, and these are like still really sticky, and these are a few years
Yeah,
old, but
yeah, they last. I have a whole drawer full. Like it's back at my parents' house, like in my old room. But like if you open up this drawer, it's literally stuffed with gloves, like from high school, from college, and I forget how we figured it out, but I think we were just at my parents' house one day with my son and going through like my old room, and I brought one of my gloves out, and he like loved. So now he loves football gloves. He'll just like he puts everything in his mouth and like just play with it. Like he's really into like
yeah,
just different textures. So he loves like the stick and he loves football gloves. So I'm starting him young. I'm getting him in the thought process of hey,
good,
football gloves are good. Yeah,
good. Well, Penn State will be recruiting him here in what, 2038 is the year.
something like that sounds about right.
Well, speaking of recruiting, Greg, we wanted to get your thoughts on recent recruiting. We've been covering it a lot, and Penn State is doing pretty good.
Yeah,
There's some key guys that they're looking at right now that we have really been harping on, but have you been following recruiting?
here and there. Like I mean, I follow all the accounts like on Twitter and stuff. I'll never really go on. I might go on a couple of times a year, but like I haven't been on like 24/7 sports or like looked at the official rankings, like unless they're tweeted out. Um, but so I'm aware of like just the different recruits that have signed recently
Mhm.
for sure.
Yeah, so we've talked we John Mitchell, Quentin Martin, a couple key signees,
Yeah,
Belgrave Shorter signed, King Mack, Landon Montgomery. The list goes on and on and on. I think what stands out to me is the fact that they've been getting 4 stars at just
yeah,
about every position, including receiver.
yeah,
And then Dylan Stewart is a guy, I'm sure you've heard of him, Greg, that I'm really hoping they get. He's I kind of relate him to Sean Oakman in terms of the excitement of having him sign and
hmm
getting him to Penn State. Uh, is Greg, do you remember anyone in particular when you were in school that was like this huge signing for Penn State? I guess Christian Hackenberg would have been that guy because you guys were both freshmen together, I believe. Um,
yeah.
do you remember a guy that stood out to you that was like this huge sign for Penn State when you were at Penn State? I mean, even Saquon, he wasn't really a
Yeah,
big
no.
sign.
Yeah, he wasn't even really supposed to be like the big running back out of that class. Yeah.
Right.
The one guy that I remember that there was a lot of buzz around, and then there was a complete 180 at one point was Brandon Wimbush. Ultimately signing at Notre Dame. I think that was his first stop. But I remember it was a big deal when he committed, and then the day he decommitted, I remember because the news broke just as we were about to go into a team meeting. So everybody was in the locker room. We go into the team meeting, and like you can tell, like the coaches are kind of scrambling.
Hmm.
So I remember that being a big deal when he committed, decommitted, all that stuff. Um, kind of same deal with Micah Parsons. Ultimately committing, decommitting, then committing again, which worked out in our favor.
Yeah.
Um, but to be honest with you, like as a player, you don't really focus too much on recruits unless it's like an obvious like, hey, this guy's 5-star like quarterback, like going to be a big time player. You don't really focus on it too much. Because at the end of the day, you still need to prove it on the field. Like I've seen guys, 5-star guys, supposed to be all world, come in, really never play at Penn State, and you know I've seen walk-ons become captains. I've seen like I think Saquon. There's a million different websites and scouting sources out there. I think Saquon was like a 3, maybe 4-star in
Hmm.
um some sites. So like again, he wasn't even supposed to be like the running back coming out of that class. I remember Andre Robinson was way higher recruit or highly rated than him. Um, so like as a team, like you just see too many inconsistencies with the stars and the ratings to be too excited about anybody until they really prove it. But I do remember just a lot of buzz around Brandon Wimbush when he committed and decommitted and everything like that.
Well, just looking at you and Hackenberg were freshmen together, right, Greg?
Yeah, yeah. So we actually shared a lot of the same classes. I remember when I was enrolling in my first summer um, at Penn State, our academic advisor Todd Kolka, who's still there now, he's been there forever. I remember talking to him, as a senior in high school. He was like, "Hey, I'm gonna make sure, like, I'm gonna throw you a bone and just give you all the same classes as Christian Hackenberg, like, so you guys have a good relationship." I'm like, "Oh, cool, like that's awesome." So it was me, Hack, and Deshaun Hamilton. It's kind of the that kind of group that was together. So I was with Christian, and we formed a solid relationship, really
Yeah.
from one of the first days in classes, um, all the way through his time.
It was you, Hackenberg, Deshaun, Adam Brenneman, Brendan
Yeah,
Mahone was a 4-star guy, Andrew Nelson was a 3-star. Um, Garrett Sickles was a 4-star signee, so they did pretty good that year in terms of
yeah.
signs. But yeah, is there anybody in particular right now recruiting wise that sticks out to you that you're watching or that you have noticed, or is that just something that
So
you don't really watch too closely?
yeah, I mean, I don't watch it too closely normally because, like I said, I've seen so many guys like so much variance on ratings and actual performance. But I will say I am excited about Quinn Martin.
Yeah.
So he's a guy. So I help coach our local middle school team, and our last game years ago. This was probably, I don't know, 3 years ago, like, or 3 football seasons ago, where we had a random game out in Bell Vernon, which is like an hour and a half away from us. It's like, why are they making middle school kids drive an hour and a half for a middle school game? But again, neither here nor there. So we went to Bell Vernon thinking, because we didn't have any film on them, thinking like, oh, it's Bell Vernon, like 6A school versus whatever they are, two A school, like we should be fine. And they absolutely killed us because there was this number 25 running back that was just so fast, like just bigger than all our kids. And like, 3 years later, he's this 5-star kid, like committing to Penn State. So it kind of makes sense now looking back at like, oh, like that makes sense. He was a 5-star recruit, but like I remember watching him like doing things, and I know he's like considered DB athlete. I'm not sure exactly if they said like where he's gonna be playing at Penn State, but like he had the ball pretty much every single time when you know during that middle school game, and he was electric. And again, not the best competition maybe, but like some of the things that I saw him do like as a younger kid, and it kind of reminded me of when I was back in high school. My senior year, we played Woodland Hills for the Whitfield Championship, and there was this kid who was, I think at the time he was 24, the running back, and he was just gashing the defense. And turns out it was Miles Sanders, and it was at the time he was a freshman, and it was like this kid's legit. Like he's gonna be something. Like you just knew from watching him. And it was kind of the same thing with this Quentin Martin kid, where like
Yeah,
anytime he touched the ball, it was going to be a big play. So I'm excited for him for sure.
that's crazy. You coached against him. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, and I had no clue who he was until like it comes out like maybe a year ago. Like, oh, this kid's like somewhat local, 5-star, and then he commits to Penn State. I'm like, cool, not bad.
At that point, you said that explains it. That explains
Yeah,
why he annihilated
yeah,
us. Got it.
yeah,
Now I understand. I always often say that to people because sometimes whatever you hear these stories about parents asking coaches, well, like, hey, do you think my son or my daughter could be an elite athlete in this sport? And sometimes it's just again, it's not the parent's scope of practice or whatever to be able to know, but if the answer to that question is yes, you almost don't have to ask the question
Hmm.
because you can just
yeah,
see it. It's like
Hmm.
it's just a different level of
yeah,
performance compared to the field. And yeah, Quentin Martin, I know Mark and I were super excited about that commitment. We had just talked about him the show or two before his
yeah,
commitment, talking about how big of a deal that could potentially be and how great he looks on film. I do think he's probably going to get a long look at running back. The only thing that I think might shift him from that position is if he comes in early enrollee,
yeah.
hits the winter conditioning, and he just like blows up.
Yeah, he's got the frame for it.
Yeah, if his body blows up and turns into something, maybe
Yeah,
that could be more valuable elsewhere besides running back. But I think he's going to get a long look there, and I do think he's just dynamic, very elite athlete.
yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm with you, but I try not to get my hopes too high or low because like I've said, like I've seen high school tapes, I've seen high school ratings be very different than college performance. So
Yeah.
that's one guy that like I said stood out to me, kind of reminded me of a Miles Sanders type. But you definitely got to temper your expectations of for 18-year-old kids or in his stage 16 or 17-year-old kids.
And one other thing too, you brought up Brandon Wimbush being a big time recruit that Penn State was um, in on and then missed on, and fortunately, for those that obviously watched and kind of saw his career pan out, didn't really hurt Penn State too much
No,
in
yeah,
that regard, which was good. But to your point, very highly rated guy, all the hype in the world, very athletic. Didn't necessarily pan out as well as we all would have thought.
Yeah.
and
Austin,
I think
go ahead. Sorry.
go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
Well, no, go ahead, Greg. You finish your point.
Um, I was just gonna, based off of my thought on Brandon Wimbush, like there's also a lot, and I think there might be a lot of behind the scenes with recruiting in terms of verbal commitments, decommitments. Because I remember like being a player and like there was guys tied to Penn State and then not tied to Penn State. Like I remember going through this list of guys that had committed or verbally committed and decommitted. Like we had guys, Brandon Wimbush, it was I believe 5-star quarterback. Justin Fields, I believe
Yeah.
was committed to Penn State. I think 4 or 5-star. I think he was a 5-star recruit. Um,
Yeah.
I believe Will Fuller,
Hmm.
back in the day, was another like 4-star receiver that Notre Dame got. And DeAndre Swift was another guy that was tied to Penn State. I don't know if he committed. So I remember like going through like, hey, what could have been like, because there were some guys that panned out, didn't pan out, but like just on a short list off the top of my head, and I know there's like a handful of other guys um, that decommitted or they were ties to Penn State, and um, there weren't anymore. I think Nick Switzer was another one. I don't know if I know he was very close to Penn State and later maybe switched to North Carolina, but it's the recruiting game is crazy now even more so with the transfer portal. But like I said, it's just nothing you can really hang your hat on until they're on the field and they're actually performing.
Yeah. And I can add another name to that list, someone that I've mentioned multiple times, Christian Wilkins, defensive tackle that ultimately signed with Clemson.
Mhm.
That would have been a massive get.
Yeah.
That one hurt, as did Justin Fields. That one hurt. Quick follow up, and then we'll shoot over to Mark, so he can get his point in. Are there rules and restrictions for current players with as far as interacting with recruits, Greg?
I'm sure there are. I remember, and there were guys that like could host recruits on official visits and everything. I was never that guy. But like I remember like I don't think you can like reach out to recruits unless they're on a visit, like you can talk to them and stuff, and or like run into them, like accidentally run into them at the facility, whatever. Um, I don't know for sure, but I know they definitely limit player to high school recruit interaction. Now I think what a lot of schools might be doing are like, especially for the bigger recruits, is maybe utilizing or leveraging like the Saquon Barkleys or Micah Parsons, just like, hey, would you reach out to this one recruit we're trying to get, or like just send him like a quick video or whatever it be. But I know like active players like in college, I don't think you can really communicate too much with high school recruits. But like I said, I could be wrong. A lot has changed in the last couple of years, so that might have relaxed a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how that changed with like the whole NIL explosion, which we'll get into briefly to kind of finish things out. But that makes a lot of sense to me. I did kind of figure there were some stipulations,
Yeah,
because you're pretty much tied to the university and the program, being an active player. But yeah, that's a really great point, as far as getting former players who
yeah,
no longer are under the same kind of stringent regulations, we'll say, to kind of reach out on the program's behalf. That's definitely a good way to go about it. It makes a ton of sense.
yeah. And I think Penn State has a lot of leverage there too, because you know Penn State has both Franklin and the university tied together. Whereas like other schools, they might, the coach might have moved, but they might have coached a big time player who's no longer at the university. But so it's like, yeah, like you're the same coach, but it's a different university, different environment. Whereas, with Penn State, like, hey, you have guys like Saquon um and Mike and these bigger name guys really giving these these testimonies for both. Like, hey, he's a great coach,
Mhm.
he's a great university. So you're getting that whole kind of picture rather than one or the other. Because
Yeah.
like I can't really think of any example, but like if you had a great player at one school, but the coach is no longer there. Like who gets credit for that? Is it the university or is it the coach? I'm sure they both take credit for it, but like there's not as much validity to that. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of a lot more connects with Penn State.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Definitely helps to have about 10 years of
Yeah,
consistency there with same coach, same university. So that message stays consistent. That makes a ton of sense. We'll shoot it over to Mark and get his thoughts on what he was saying earlier.
Yeah, I was just going to well, I was going to say, speaking of guys that could have come to Penn State but didn't, Jim Kelly, Dan Marino, Shady McCoy, Darrell Revis, Tony Dorsett, Larry Fitzgerald. Um, they're
yeah,
pretty much all Hall of Famers right there that
It,
didn't come to Penn State that could
yeah,
have.
they were all half decent, huh?
Well,
yeah,
I know Joe didn't like Marino. I think had some character issues at the time, and then
yeah,
Jim Kelly, he didn't like him either. But you know, we are not Pitt fans on this podcast at all, but Pitt has some really good football players for sure.
yeah,
The University of Pittsburgh. So, um, but yeah, I know they were all I'm pretty sure all of those guys, especially Shady McCoy, I believe he really wanted to go to Penn State. And they just didn't. But yeah, man. Greg, I want to talk to you about kind of two things. And then we're going to finish off. I just want to get your thoughts on the Steelers draft. Whether you think they're going to go with that because you're a Steelers fan. So the Jay Paterno tweet was NIL related, and then the recent NIL deal, we can get through that pretty quick. They just signed a huge NIL deal, which is awesome. Austin and I have been harping on that for months. NIL needs to get caught up to speed, so it looks like they are on the right track for that, which is fantastic. What were your thoughts on the Jay Paterno tweet and the kind of the thing between him and Mike Motti?
Yeah. So, I mean, without getting too political, controversial, and I think because I saw Trace kind of got circled in a bunch of political stuff as well, and he said it perfectly. And I don't know if he had like a PR team that drafted it up for him, but like as a player, like especially that was a part of Franklin's staff, um, we are absolutely behind like whoever is in the business or has Penn State football's best interest in mind, whether that's from like an NIL standpoint, staff, school standpoint, like and from a football NIL standpoint, to be competitive, to be winning Big Ten championships, national championships, you are going to have to differentiate yourself in the NIL space. I know there's a lot of controversy and how that's affecting the NCAA and everything, but it's where we're at. Whether you want to agree, disagree, debate it or not, like you need NIL to be competitive in the NCAA. So whoever, whether it's collective, whether it's donors, if they're backing Penn State and Penn State football, like that's what they need to find success on the field and success on the recruiting trail. So again, I don't really want to take sides, be too political, controversial, but I'll say like, hey, if you're behind Penn State football and really being conscious about how you reach that success through NIL and growing the program, that's what they need, quite frankly. So, yeah, that's what I will say about that. And like I said, I think if you're not familiar, for those who are listening or whoever aren't aware, haven't seen it, look what Trace tweeted out a couple of days or maybe a week ago, and I think he hit the nail right on the head. And that's really the mindset we all share, as former players and especially as former players on that Franklin staff, and the way he has created that family like environment and how he develops that program. Like, look at what Trace tweeted. That's what we're all thinking.
Yeah, I tend to pretty much agree. That's really probably the best way to put it. Uh, and frankly, I think Trace getting kind of negatively caught up in all this.
Yeah,
that was some that I mean that was just a bunch of nonsense. Really, that was just a bunch of crap. He didn't deserve that, but I think he handled it with class like he does everything else.
for sure.
And so
Shout out to
definitely,
him for getting signed. I don't know if that was today or yesterday, but shout out to
yep.
him, man. Really, really happy for him.
Yeah, I was just about to say that tip of the cap and give him some love for getting picked up by the Patriots, reuniting with Mike Gesicki up there in New England. So wish him nothing but the best for both those guys. I hope they're very, very successful. But yeah, and I'll get maybe little bit controversial. I did kind of take a pretty hard line on that one. Pretty much, very much more in favor with Mike Mouty. And now this deal comes out, and I'm a proof is in the pudding kind of guy. What have you actually done? Well, Mike Mouty's a big part of Lions Legacy Club, and they just secured this deal. They just did it, 7 figures, multi-year deal to support NIL with Penn State football. So Mike's coming out and he's putting the money where his mouth is. He's definitely, obviously very pro Penn State football being successful and supporting the program and all those types of things. So I think it definitely needs to be commended. Definitely tip of the cap to Mike. And like Mark and I reminded everybody, for those that are alumni, we do have some alumni elected trustee elections coming up. So be sure to do your due diligence, check each of those candidates out, and vote your conscience, vote accordingly for beliefs that you share along with those candidates.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Whoever is helping with the NIL and is trying to advance that, that's what you want to focus on. And quite frankly, all of the rest of it is noise. As we've said on here before, regardless of who they are, if they're not trying to help this NIL situation, then it's just noise. So at the end of the day, that's what we want. And it looks like it's going in the right direction. But Gregg, real quick, getting your final thoughts. We have a few minutes here. Can you guys see the timer?
Yes.
Can you
Yeah.
see it, Gregg? Okay.
Yeah.
Steelers draft. Gregg and I are Steelers fans. As we said, Gregg's dad played for the Steelers. I believe he was what? He was right next to Jack Lambert in the locker room.
Yep.
Which is a funny story. Gregg's talked about that before, but what do you think they're going to do, man? I heard that they may move up to number 9. I don't know if they'll get Joey Porter Jr. I don't know if they're going to go O-line, corner. I don't know. D-line.
Yeah. So,
Any thoughts on that?
I have a million thoughts on the Steelers and the draft. And for the past couple years, I've absolutely hated how they've handled just off seasons and drafts. I think they're still behind where they should be or where they ought to be based on the draft equity that they've had, the salary cap that they've been able to spend. I think they're quite behind on where they should be. When I look at the last 3 to 4 years, what they should have done in my mind. Because I've been saying, hey, for this has been for the last couple of years, for the first at least 2 picks. If I think about the Steelers, right? What has been the biggest weakness of the Steelers for what seems like forever, but especially the last 3, 4 years? Biggest glaring point of emphasis was we need to bulken up the offensive line. Well, the last 3 to 4 years, they didn't do anything to help. They got more weapons, which is all fun and good, but at the end of the day, like, you have this franchise quarterback apparently like, hey, let's protect him. Like, let's open up some holes for this first round quarterback that we drafted, which is another couple conversations. But I really hope they draft a tackle or an offensive lineman. Now, if they just fly off the board, at 17 or wherever they end up at, if they decide to trade, I would say like 1A would be a cornerback, like the top cornerback available. But yeah, I could go on and on and on about like the mistakes that they've made in free agency in the draft for the last 3, 4 years. And I've been yelling and screaming from my soapbox, like, draft an offensive lineman. And I remember when it all kind of the snowball effect first started was when they traded up in the top 10 to get Devin Bush. I hated that pick. That's somebody that, and I've talked to, old Penn State coaches, like, that's a guy that they literally went after in scouting, him against Michigan. Like, he could not defend, certain, like, whenever interior guards or any pullers, he didn't know how to react to different pullers, different motions, um, terrible in pass protection. So whenever they traded up to draft him, I was furious because I wanted them to draft an offensive lineman then. And it's just kind of snowballed from there, like drafting Kenny Pickett, who I'm not a huge fan of, drafting
Yeah,
Najee
I'm
Harris,
not either.
like, drafting all these, players that were positions we don't necessarily need in the first round. I thought they were going to be on the right track. What was it last year when they signed Mitchell Trubisky? Like perfect. Like you have a competent starter. Like we can lose with him. Like it's fine. We'll probably win 7 to 8 games with him. We'll get a
Yeah,
decent draft pick and be able to tighten up the offensive line. But no, they signed Mitchell Trubisky and then
yeah,
draft Kenny Pickett. It's like, what are we doing, guys? So, like I said, I could go on, but I'm hoping they draft an offensive lineman. If none of the top guys are available, then falling back on DBs. That's my
yeah.
thought, but they probably won't do that. They'll probably go with, you know, the High Smiths and Watts third string, backup in the first round.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. I'm not a big Kenny Pickett guy. I think he will be a pretty good quarterback, but first of all, he's a Pitt guy. I know I
Yeah,
that's how much I dislike Pitt. I don't want a Pitt guy on my team, but I was hoping they would wait until this year to get CJ Stroud because I think he's the best quarterback in this draft. I think he would be a good fit for the Steelers, but yeah, the Najee signing, I mean, he hasn't really panned out. Fryermuth has done
no.
well, but yeah, it's just I don't know. Najee's been a little disappointing, but
Mhm.
again, he doesn't really have a line, man. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, and I think at this point in today's game, like you don't draft running back in the first round. And I know there's a lot of buzz about Bijan Robinson coming out of Texas. Like I understand like the hype and to be quite frank, like I don't think he's anywhere close to the prospect as Saquon was, and I
yeah,
feel like he's getting a lot more buzz than Saquon was.
yeah, for
Um,
sure.
but like you can get guys in free agency like a Kareem Hunt type running back who's literally still available for probably like $3 or $4 million. I think that's the
Hmm.
number that they're throwing out.
Yeah,
Like what's wrong with that? Like you look at when the Patriots had their huge runs, like they had like the Deion Lewises and the James Whites that weren't like, super great running backs, but they could catch it out of the backfield. They could, make decent plays, good pass blocking, and they were super cheap.
yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know, man. I don't want to get too worked up about the Steelers because
Greg Greg was Greg was on a good run there
yeah,
on his Steelers analysis. Didn't want to get too hyped up. Got pretty hyped up though.
Well,
yeah,
yeah,
they're just
yeah,
they're always a disappointment, but it is what it
yeah,
is.
man. Yeah, I Greg's diehard Steelers just like I am. I remember in 2013 or when I was 13, 2005, I prayed every night that the Steelers would win the Super Bowl. I was literally praying every single night, like, please God, let the Steelers win the Super Bowl. And they did because they had that heartbreaking loss to the Patriots. Oh God, that still brings pain. In the AFC Championship, when Big Ben threw that interception at the end. And that was just and the announcers they're so heartbroken. I remember when they were like, oh, he threw the interception, and then to this day, man, like when they lost to the Packers, Aaron Rodgers
Yeah,
has been the most like overhyped quarterback in the NFL since then. He is very good, obviously, but he beat the Steelers. That was when Mike Tomlin on Big Ben's podcast said that defense was the best defense he ever coached, was that
yeah,
2010 Steelers defense. And they showed them up in the Super Bowl. Still a very heartbreaking loss. You never get over that really until you get back and win again. But yeah, man, like you were saying, you know, they got Najee, they got Pickens was a good pick, but really the second round guys have panned out better than the first round guys. I mean,
yeah,
Juju, Claypool, Pickens is going to be another guy. Hopefully they don't trade him away, but you know, they draft these second round talents they turn into divas, then they trade him away, which is fine. That's what the Steelers do. But like LeGarrette Blount, they traded him away. He won a Super Bowl with the Patriots. So yeah, you're right. Like I think Najee hasn't really panned out because of the O line. Um, I mean, they need D tackle. They need another cornerback. They need an offensive lineman. So when they trade up for this 9 guy, if they do, I'm thinking they're going to go Jalen Carter, but
Yeah,
maybe they're going to go. I think he's the Pollock out of Northwestern. I forget his name, but
yeah, the Skoronsky or whatever,
Bronski. Yeah,
whatever his name is. Yeah, he's
yeah,
they're saying he's like a Hall of Fame caliber player.
yeah. So
But
I don't know if they'll go him. I mean, they made these free agent signings for the line, and they've done phenomenal with they got Patrick Peterson and Keanu Neal.
yeah,
That is awesome.
yeah,
And quite honestly, I think having those guys, it almost makes them contenders, I believe, for a playoff run. I really do. Because yes, they're at the end of their careers, you can say, but they're great leaders, they're great players. So I don't know, man.
yeah. We'll see. I think just thinking about the makeup of the team, it reminds me a lot of like when the Bengals were starting to come up. Like, hey, you have this young quarterback that's and I don't think Pickett is on the same level or wasn't on the same level coming into the draft or out of college as Joe Burrow was. Um, but you look at okay, you have George Pickens with like he seems to be like a monster outside, kind of like a Jamar Chase and Deontay Johnson, kind of like a solid 1-2 punch like T Higgins and Tyler Boyd and um, you know defensively, I think the Steelers are a lot stronger than the Bengals, but their biggest hiccup, both teams, is offensive line.
Yeah,
And for the past couple of years with the Bengals, the biggest reason why they're not, reaching the Super Bowl or winning the Super Bowl is because they can't protect Joe Burrow. Um, so I think, I think there's still a little bit. It depends on the rest of this offseason and the draft. I think the Steelers are another year away from being real contenders, but I don't think they're far off. Like if they can get the draft right, if they can get another maybe couple signings in there, I think they are right there. Again, kind of
yeah,
like the Bengals were kind of right on the cusp and went on a run later that season, couple years back. Um, but like I said before, you can never really get your hopes too high for that front office. Yeah, I think they've fumbled a few things the past couple years.
well, the criticism is there that Mike Tomlin won a Super Bowl and went to another Super Bowl with Bill Cowher's team, which you know it's partially is true. I mean, he really didn't. You don't just go to a Super Bowl because you have good players. I mean, Mike Tomlin is a great coach in my opinion,
Yeah.
but
Yep.
he's one of the best. But he hasn't really proven to me that he can build his own team and make a deep postseason run. They haven't won a playoff game since 2016. I
Yeah.
think it's the last
Forever.
time they won. And then, they got beat in the AFC Championship against the Patriots, I think in like 2018 or something like that. It's been pretty, or 2017, it's been pretty rough. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think the Steelers. I feel like just need to commit because for the past again 3, 4, 5 off seasons, it's like hey, like we think the window's still open. We're gonna try to make a push to make a long run. I feel like the writing was on the wall, where it was like, hey, at best, you guys are gonna win maybe one game in the playoffs. And I think the front office feels, and I think a lot of Steelers fans feel that like, hey, we're the Pittsburgh Steelers. We need to be contenders each and every single year. Where my mindset is, like especially when Big Ben was out the door and like the roster was in tough shape, like commit to a rebuild. Like yeah, like don't say like we're tanking or like don't bribe the coach to lose games like the Dolphins did. Um, but like, yeah, like sign Mitch Trubisky, like lose games with him. Like he's competent enough to like not be like a complete idiot out there, but like he's not gonna be like a Super Bowl winning quarterback. So like
Yeah.
have one bad year where you have a top 10 pick and like,
Yep.
use that draft equity that we have. Like, hey, we traded Chase Claypool for basically a first round pick. Like it would have been awesome to have the number 7 pick and the 32 pick. But each and every single year, it's like, hey, we're a cusp playoff team
Yeah.
and we're picking anywhere from 15 to 20, where it's like, yeah, don't get me wrong, you can get a really, really good player there. But like when you're picking in the top 10, those are all pro players. So I think the
Yep.
front office needs to get off this whole thing of, oh, Mike Tomlin's never had a losing season. Like, who cares? Like, he hasn't won
Yeah.
a playoff game. He hasn't won a Super Bowl in
Right.
forever. Like, fans especially, like, hey, this isn't the 70s or 80s anymore. Like, this is a completely different franchise, completely different game in general. Like, we need to do things the right way. Like, we need to have a proper rebuild rather than trying to reload because you think the window's open because it's not. Kind of like the Penguins are going through it as well right now. Like, we have generational talents on the Penguins. I know it's a completely different sport. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be logging off right now. Um, but like you have Sidney Crosby's and Evgeny Malkins who definitely at the end of their careers, but front office is like, hey, we need to make this push because their window's still open. Well, I mean, yeah, we have Sidney Crosby, but like the rest of the team is super old and slow. So the state of Pittsburgh sports right now is not very good. But
Yeah, I think and I'm not a diehard Steelers fan. I'm certainly not a Penguins fan. Sorry, Greg. But but um a lot of value in what you're saying. And I think you're right as far as the Steelers and what they ought to be doing. And really, just in general, I think it comes down to just some things that you kind of have to just acknowledge in life in general, even outside of sports. You just have to be honest with what situation you're in. You just got to be honest with yourself. You got to be
right,
honest with other people about where you're at and what the
right,
reality is of the situation. And, you know, I think the Steelers did a good job with signing Sam Alou from the Philadelphia Eagles. And that's a big bump. But if you can go with your first round pick and get a franchise tackle, I mean, you have to do that.
yeah,
We've seen this. We've seen this experiment pan out a number of times across teams, and it was stupid every time. You look at what Indianapolis did when they drafted Andrew Luck and gave him no offensive lineman. They got him
yeah,
so banged up and hurt that he retired when he was still a young guy. Like Joe Burrow, if he had adequate protection, he's in the Super Bowl.
Mhm.
yeah.
Let's be honest here.
Yep.
All the credit to the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes and all this stuff and whatever else.
And
But
the Chiefs are drafting like they just drafted Creed Humphreys, who's an all pro guy, and he was just drafted, and that's a guy who I was thinking out of college, like, hey, that would be a perfect fit for the Steelers. Like we're
Yeah.
looking for interior alignment, but yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but that
no, and that's
case in point.
exactly the point that I'm talking about. So you're looking at a situation. You look at the Philadelphia Eagles. Look at what they're doing with their offensive line,
Right,
stellar offensive line, and
right,
it's my hope. Now they got all pro guys all over that line, but they're getting older.
Yeah.
yeah,
Gonna need to replace guys. I hope to God they take a franchise tackle in this draft. They got 2 picks. And again, that's the mindset of the front office. That's the alignment, ownership, GM, coach. They understand that is the way to go. Kansas City, who's the head coach? Andy Reid, former longtime Philadelphia Eagle. What was he notoriously good at? Drafting offensive linemen. See the same thing.
yeah,
So I get the notion of, well, we gotta make this push. The window's still open. I think what folks they miss the forest for the trees in these situations, because the way you make the push is by always consistently building towards the future.
yeah,
If you need a piece, if you need a weapon, you can free agency one player. You can go into free agency and get a piece.
Yeah.
Like, but you can't build the bulk of a roster through free agency. It's not the best way to go. It's wildly expensive to try to do that. And usually what happens too is you can just totally just devoid yourself of quality draft picks because they're getting worked into these trades and these big time deals and whatever else. And then you're not building the depth. You're not building the thing from the ground up. So you're kind of sitting in a house of cards, and eventually 99 times out of 100, those things absolutely collapse. And then the rebuild that you were so worried about not doing is now going to have to be so much longer because you just weren't doing what you should have been doing the whole time. So I hope, for your guys' sake, and I absolutely don't mind the Steelers at all. Again, Pennsylvania team, tons of respect for them. But I agree. I think they got to go O-line and really build this thing out from the ground up, because that's what you need to be successful. Like I said, Kenny Pickett, I do think he has potential to be a pretty good quarterback. It doesn't matter how talented of a quarterback you are if you don't have protection and time. It doesn't matter how good your weaponry is if you're getting sacked in 2 seconds. Your receivers don't have any time to do anything. It seems so obvious and logical. That's because it is. And a lot of times the front office types are making decisions maybe not necessarily in the best interest of the X's and O's and the football perspective. In some cases, in my opinion. But we'll see what they can do. They have an opportunity. There's definitely a boatload of very quality players to be had in this upcoming draft. So they're going to have opportunities. What they do with it, we will just have to wait and see.
For sure.
Yeah, and that's what Penn State's doing with recruiting. So keeping the young, highly talented players coming in. So that's exactly what we want Penn State to do. It's essentially the same thing. It's not, we had this great team, let's go to the playoff, win a national title. It's keeping that going, like Alabama, like Georgia, like Ohio State. They've been doing that for years. So
achieving sustained success. And again, this is primarily a Penn State football oriented podcast and show. I don't think we're going to have to twist anybody's arms that is a Penn State fan about the importance of having a quality offensive line. I don't think we need to do that. I think everyone is on the same page with that side of the argument.
Yeah, because we haven't always had that, even back when Saquon was there, especially particularly 2017, I'd say the weak point was that offensive line just not being able to, because he's a very hard guy to block for. And you need a very like a unique type of lineman to block for a guy like that. Gregg, would you agree?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so, but yeah, man, it's good to see what Penn State's doing, Gregg. We really appreciate you coming on, man, and talking with us. We'd love to have you back on again at some point. And spring game is here. And then after that, it's nothing but 2023 season and going into that. And again, we'll be on here 3 days a week talking Penn State football. And Gregg, once again, man, we appreciate your time, and it's always good to have you on here and get a player's perspective. So
yeah, great talking with you guys, for sure.
I do believe that is the final word, folks. Little bit of a longer episode today. I hope you all enjoy that. We greatly appreciate your viewership and following along with us. If you did like the video, hit that like button. Subscribe if you're not. As always, drop those comments in there. Show us as well as Gregg your love and appreciation for our discussion today. Gregg, thank you so much for joining us, as we've already said. And folks, let's put our hands together and hope that the weather holds off and holds up for us tomorrow for the blue-white game. Again, we will be back on Monday with the next episode. Until then, have a good weekend, and we'll catch you in the next one.